Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph.
And I'm Lonnie.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about business models. You know, wine is, after all, a business. Wine Country is a place where people to come to buy wine. Yes? And there's a lot of different kinds of business models.
It's a fun business, an interesting business, and I find that it's as diverse as the people that are in it.
Right. But it goes back to a very traditional system in which, people grew grapes and then they made wine and then you went by their place and you picked up wine. And it was very simple. It was just like any other type of farm product if you were growing apples and making apple cider. But as we moved into, a global economy and we moved into the digital age and the age of the web, we started seeing more and more different types of systems come into place. For instance, we did a show this past year about the caves of Soda Canyon, where you have multiple wineries share one cave.
That's a really interesting sort of cooperative venture, sharing costs and really advocating for each other. And it really creates a sense of community from that group of wineries and vineyards that put their efforts all together under one roof.
And then, for instance, this past year, I was out touring and I was up at a winery and I chatted with a young gentleman who was working as a tour guide, in part to pay for his work as a winemaker in his own little company. He made about 700 cases a year. He sold it primarily to some very nice restaurants, but in tanks, in barrels. He didn't bottle it, which was something that's very popular with the millennials, it seems like.
For the tap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wine with a tap.
I think that's interesting because they really can pour by the ounce.
Yes.
And charge by the ounce, and you get to try a lot of wines in restaurants or some wine bars that have the wines on tap. It's a very unique and new kind of way to market wine.
And it also saves them an awful lot of money in bottles and corks.
That's true.
Not a minor expense.
And you're back.
And you're back.
Carrying cases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just put them on the truck.
I guess the barrel.
Yes, but you put that in a little fork truck.
Exactly.
You roll that around. And what was interesting was I asked him, well, where do you make your wine? And he actually had listed a series of places that he had worked over the years that were custom crush facilities, where you could go there if you have grapes and you can make your wine. And I asked him, well, how do you pay for that? He says, oh, you pay by the gallon or by the pound. How many pounds of grapes are you processing?
Our wine tour guests are always fascinated by the idea that, you could have a wine label and not have a facility to actually make the wine from end to end. And when I describe the certain aspects that you can go take it to a custom crush facility and then bottling, they think the mobile bottling units are just crazy. They just can't even imagine it if they're not from the area because it's something that you really have to see to believe. I tell them it's a little bit of magic. The wine goes in on one end and it comes out bottled, boxed, labeled, corked, everything, and it just pops out the other end by magic.
Yeah.
And so that they think that's fun.
And that's a relatively new manifestation, and it came from the fact that in order to bottle, you need fairly sophisticated equipment, and it's one of the easiest places to screw up the bottle. I mean, all this way along, you've tended these grapes. You've worked so hard to make them as perfect as possible. Then you make the wine. It's like cooking a huge stew that you cook over a period of about a year. Imagine cooking a stew for a year. And then you're going to put it into the bottle, and it's so easy to screw up at that point because maybe there's a little, air in there, maybe the cork isn't quite right or something like that. So when you hand it over to professionals who do this all the time, the chance of it being ruined goes way down.
Well, not only that, it gives an opportunity for people who are making 200 cases, 300 cases, 500 cases, really, really small production. And I see that with the guests that come tour with us, more and more people want this boutique label, something they can't buy at home. And, it's kind of an interesting sort of avenue that branched off of the commercial winemaking. Well, if you're going to make 200 cases or 400 cases, there's no reason for you to have the kind of facility that would have all those parts of the puzzle.
Right.
So that's where these interesting ideas came to be.
Right. After all, you're only going to use the equipment for a few months out of the year.
And I think it's the young blood in it's the next generation of vineyard owners who said, you know, we grow these beautiful grapes and we sell them to wineries to make wonderful wine. And it doesn't say our name on the
Right.
label. And so I'd like to see our family's name represented
Right.
on the label. And so they hold back a certain amount of the grapes and just make 200, 300, 500 cases.
Exactly. And it's interesting because just recently, there was a study that came out and it said that half of the wine sold here in wine country in Napa, Sonoma, is sold directly to customers by them coming by and buying the wine or being members of the wine club. The other half is shipped out across the country into distribution. But that's really interesting because 85% of the wineries have no distribution. So there's a tremendous number of small wineries that are making just small lots that are being sold directly to customers. And that's the idea behind today's show. We did a really interesting interview with with Mary Gavin, who at the time was working at Naked Wines. Naked Wines had a tasting room in downtown Napa. They have a winery over in Sonoma. And it's really almost a wine, it's not really a wine cooperative, it's almost kind of like the network marketing system of wines where you have a group of angels who buy a certain amount of wine each month, and then that money, about 90% of it is allocated to supporting winemakers who are making small lots of wine. And many times these are people who made wines for much bigger wineries, and now they have a chance to do a special project. Maybe someone that they spend all the time making Cabernet Sauvignon, and they really want to make a Grenache, but their boss won't let them make a Grenache, so they get funding through Naked Wines Angels to make their Grenache.
What could be more perfect than wine
Right.
made by angels?
Oh, yes, how true. So enjoy the interview. It gives you a very interesting insight into a very new business model here in wine country. So Mary, tell me, how did you get interested in the wine business?
Well, I went to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, which is in the heart of the Central Coast.
Yes.
That was where I was first introduced to wineries and going wine tasting on the weekends. And I studied ag science there, so it was kind of a natural fit for me to go into wine after I graduated.
Oh, you're thoroughly authentic around here.
I guess, yeah.
Well, I always say that, you know, wine country is farm country with good restaurants. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I mean, I just kind of fell in love with the fact that you're surrounded by land and that the land is being cultivated. Yeah.
That's nice. Well, wine is a whole other aspect of it. I remind people when they come here that we have three industries. We have farming, complete with pickup trucks and cowboy hats, and then we have winemaking, which is a whole separate field.
Yeah.
And then we have the section that we work in with it, which is hospitality.
Right, the
which
retail.
kind of sits like the, kind of like the frosting on the cake. And what drew you into wine specifically? Because there's lots of agriculture.
Well, I liked wine because it generally makes people happy.
That's true.
But also, I studied more of the viticulture side of it. But as far as my personality, I think I definitely work better with people. So it was kind of like this balance between being a part of something that I learned all about, but being a part of it and where I fit in.
Well, that's important. It's important to know your talents.
Yes. So.
Well, how did you end up in Napa, Sonoma, North Bay? Because this whole state, California, grows grapes.
Exactly. So I grew up in San Diego.
Right.
My sort of first conviction was wanting to preserve land and be around more land because I was in an area where they built up a lot of tract homes. When I moved to San Luis Obispo, that was when I decided that I loved being in wine country. And I just kind of kept gradually moving more north. I had a lot of my friends, alumni from Cal Poly, moved to Napa and got into the wine industry. And through social media, you can always see how much fun they're having, and that it's a completely social community. It's very easy to fit in here.
It really, if you're in the industry, especially.
Especially if you're in the industry. And actually, most of the people I feel like who live in Napa, they're in the industry.
Yeah, primarily.
So if they're living here full time.
Yeah. There's a bit of a monoculture in terms of that.
Yeah.
I mean, in Sonoma, they grow turkeys and other things, but Napa, we grow grapes. We make wine.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I'm here is because the business model that you have to work with, that you have to engage with, is very different from the classic winery. I mean, normally, you grow the grapes, oh, we got too many grapes. Let's make some wine of our own. We'll start selling it from the back porch. Oh, we need a bigger back porch. And next thing you know, you have a tasting room. And next thing you know, you have your own winery. And that's how a lot of these places
Right.
grew. And it's a pretty simple, I feed you.
Yeah.
But Naked Wines is a very complex business model in comparison. Could you describe it a little bit, please?
Right.
For me,
So
please?
Naked Wines, you can kind of think of it as Kickstarter for winemakers. So we are a network of wine drinkers, and we're connecting those wine drinkers directly to winemakers. Through our angel program, we actually are able to fund winemakers so they can go out, they buy their grapes, they make their wines, and then they pass those wines back to us. We pass them back to our customers, and they're exclusively for them, and we give our angels a preferential price as well. So it's kind of this virtuous circle of, no one gets screwed, everyone kind of gets more. So
Yeah, real sharing. I like
Yeah.
the term of, angels has always been a term used for investors who help things get started.
right,
It
right.
comes out of venture capital.
Yeah, and it can be thought of in that way. So an angel would put $40 into their Naked Wines account every month. They use that money to buy wines, and they're getting them at 40 to 60% off the retail price. The nice thing about what angels are doing is that money that they put forward, it basically is like future orders.
Right.
So that's going to ensure that we work with more winemakers, that the company just grows from within.
I'll tell you, as I was, waiting to get started, I was wandering around and I was reading all the banners on the walls.
Yeah.
All the different stories, and some of these people I know.
Really?
Yeah, some of them I
Yeah,
know.
it's a small industry.
Yeah.
Definitely, we want to showcase the winemakers. When they work with us, we let them make whatever wines they'd like. Whereas a lot of times, these guys have been making wines for years. For other people, winning awards, and we're always kind of kept in the cellar. And with Naked Wines, we're doing sort of like what the restaurant industry did with chefs, and we're
Right.
bringing them out into the light, saying, this winemaker, this is their story, and Naked Angels helped them achieve their dream of
Right.
making their wines and putting their name on the label.
Well,
So-
it's interesting. I don't know if you know the history of Captain Kneebaum and his winery, the Inglenook Winery, that he was the first one to bottle his own wines with his own label.
Really?
Before
That's
then, it was
interesting.
all negotiants. Everything was shipped down to San Francisco and bottled there by the negotiants, just like it's done in France commonly.
Yeah,
But he decided his wines were too good. He wanted to have his own bottling and his own labels.
yeah.
So
It's very
it
innovative.
dramatically changed, and I'm sure a lot of these winemakers have been selling wines and juice to other people for years.
Right, yeah.
And suddenly they have the opportunity to say, oh, these 3 barrels I have over here that are special to me, I don't have to mix them in with everything else.
Right, yeah.
Because they do know which barrels are.
Oh,
which
they
barrels.
definitely know, yeah.
I know another winemaker, a woman winemaker, who describes them as her children. That barrel or this tank is my child.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, wine, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. So they're really dedicating themselves, through the course of years to make
like
these
children,
wines.
yes.
Just like children.
Yes, just like children.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see how many more women winemakers there are.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that Delia Seja.
Yeah, Dahlia Seha. Yeah.
Right, is one of the people here who I know.
Absolutely. Well, we have several women winemakers. Their wines are fabulous and compete with the boys just as well. In Dahlia's case, she comes from the Seha family,
Right.
and Naked was a way for her to break out on her own and kind of
Yeah.
carve her own path. So
Right.
we've really enjoyed working with all of the ladies, and I love when they come in here and pour their wines.
Well, also women are typically very good networkers.
Right.
It's one of the skills they
Yeah.
thrive upon and are oftentimes superior than men. So it's interesting that they would find this such a comfortable environment. People have a great sense of wanting to belong
Yes.
to a community. And as we're talking, I'm realizing how important that would be to your winemakers, that they
Yeah.
had this community where they can come and they could ask questions.
It's great.
How are people liking my wine? That's an important question.
We have winemaker happy hours on Friday nights, and they'll come and pour their wines. And
Really?
yeah, and it's a great chance for them to engage with their customers. Or if we're having like an angel event on the weekends, we'll have a winemaker host that, and it's wonderful because so often you will go into the valley and you'll try these wines and you'll never know who actually had their hands in it. And here they talk about what went into it, what they were thinking when they added this or did that. And it's fascinating and it's very informative. So I love when they come in.
There's nothing like tasting wine with a winemaker.
Absolutely.
To really learn how wine functions and why it tastes the way it does, even if it's not their wine.
Yeah.
Because they think of it in terms of process. It's so different from tasting with a sommelier.
Right.
It's a completely different
It
experience.
is, and I actually don't taste with too many somms, but I've tasted with plenty of winemakers. I'm in that business. And it's wonderful to see their thought process on it as almost like it's a bridge between art and science. You know, there's this creative aspect to the wine, and especially when they work with us and they can make whatever wine they'd like but there's still that scientific component where it's chemistry and it's making sure that, you know, everything is right and balanced, because, you know, they're taking small amounts and multiplying it across a huge tank. So.
Well, it's funny when I remember a winemaker saying to me one time that, you know, at this level, you only get one shot so many times.
Right.
You know, and sometimes you only get 300 cases of a wine. But the good thing is if it's the worst wine you've ever made, you only have 300 cases. But the bad thing is if it's the best wine you've ever made,
you only have
300 cases.
Exactly.
So, and I imagine that many times with these wines, these are the ones that they've held aside.
Right. Well, when, for example, Ken Dice, he's been making wine in Napa almost 40 years. Founding father of cab, some might say. But when he came to work with us, he wanted to make Roussan. And that was the wine that he wanted to make, and so we let him make it. It turned out great, and it introduced a wine that not a lot of people know about. And yeah, it's great. It's kind of the nice thing about this place is that we have so many different wines from so many different places that you really can find something for everyone.
Well, that's also, it's wonderful to see people have the opportunity to go beyond their safe zone.
Right.
You know, winemaking is by its nature a risk-adverse field because there's so many ways it can go wrong.
Exactly.
You know, great winemaking is having to do about 30 steps perfectly.
Right.
Every time. They oftentimes say that a winemaker's best wine is oftentimes their first one because they actually follow all the instructions.
Yeah, they do it step by step.
And by the next time they figure, well, I'm pretty good at this, and they go a little off the rails. But in this situation, because they're part of this community, they can experiment. They can go into areas that they have a passion for.
Right.
And whenever you can help people express their passion for something, you're going to get some remarkable results.
Absolutely. You can taste the passion in these wines.
That's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the concept of a community of winemakers.
Yeah.
In fact, that's another theme that comes up from winemakers many times is that it takes a whole community to create wines.
It's true. You can't, especially when you're doing it on a production level, you can't do it by yourself. There's so much that goes into it. And so it's nice. And actually, one of the nice things when we'll have new winemakers come in and work with us, they'll talk to each other and they'll collaborate and they'll kind of, you know, if they don't know what to do about whatever's going on with the wine, they can talk to someone else who's been making wine for longer and perhaps has insight to it. And so it's nice to see them work together, especially.
That's very nice. Like I said, belonging is very important to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Nakedwines.com is a family company. We are still a startup, and I mean, it's a wonderful company to be a part of. The winemakers, the people who are in the office, the people in the tasting room, we all really care about each other and work together. And so community is one word that definitely fits the bill when it's describing Naked Wines.
I really like the way in which the organization provides things for their angels. I was over in Kenwood the other day at the facility.
Right, our winery and tasting
room.
room.
I was there with my clients, and someone had asked about certain wines, and I knew we could find them there. And over by the winery was a whole bunch of people and a lot of cars there, and I thought, what's going on? So I wandered over, I'm endlessly curious. Yeah. And they were doing a blending for the angels.
Yeah, blendings are the newest thing that we've kind of started to explore. We do them here as well. And it's a great opportunity for people to play with wines and be a winemaker for
Right.
a day. So we typically use Bordeaux varietals, and they'll blend and they'll come up with their perfect wine by by tasting. Once they've decided what that wine is, then we actually bottle it for them, and they make a custom label, and they get to take it home with them.
No, what's especially neat about this, though, because there's many wineries that do blending.
Yeah.
Not many, but there's a good number.
Yeah, there's a good handful.
Is that it's for your community of people who will come back and probably see the same people again.
Yeah.
Or some of the same people again.
It's true, yeah.
That's why it's very neat. It's, you show up there and the same group of people are moving on to the next step. How did
Yeah.
your last wine turn out? Oh, it turned out really well. I'm going to try something different this time.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was fun. When we launched the blending here, it was great to see how not a single person made the same blend.
Oh, yes.
It was everyone had their own taste.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the names that they came up with were so creative
Right.
and fun, and it was great. It was a very unique experience.
Well, it really describes that thing that people say to, visitors all the time. Oh, what's the best wine? And what do we all say? It's the wine you like.
Exactly. Yeah.
People's tastes really are unique. It changes with their age. It changes with their background. It changes with the time of the day.
Yeah,
with their
mood,
physiology.
everything. Yeah.
Their anatomy. It used to be that people really liked sweet wines.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Life was really rough.
They
Of course,
wanted
you wanted
something
sweet
sweet.
wines.
Yeah.
Life is good now. People drink drier wines.
Yeah,
you know.
they definitely are open to exploring more, and I think that wine's becoming more accessible to different generations. And in my generation, we like certain wines. I know that I was talking to Jack Cole, one of our winemakers, the other day about his Chardonnay, which is completely unoaked, and it's interesting to see, like, that's a Chardonnay that appeals to me, that fruit forward, stainless steel kind of Chard, crisp. But my dad, on the other hand, he likes those buttery, oaky Chards. And it's interesting. Jack was saying that he's noticed it with generations, just different tastes. And
Oh, very much. Well, as the time goes on, your palate shifts. Your most active part of the palate shifts from the tip of the tongue back.
Oh, okay.
So as you're young, you like the sweeter wines, which is at the tip, of course,
Yeah.
and then it moves back into the savory parts
Right.
later in the
Hence
palate.
a more developed palate.
More developed palate. And then
Yeah.
later in life, people like the bigger tannic wines, partially because the flavors have to get through the weaker palate, but also
Yeah.
because it's now shifting more towards the bitter sections in the back of the throat and the back of the tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it really shifts, so you evolve over time.
Interesting.
That was another thing I wanted to ask you about. In tasting room staff oftentimes change rather quickly, and the reason is they're pouring 5 wines or 4 wines. Well, after a while, they get tired of talking about the same 4
thing.
wines.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have to pour this Sauvignon Blanc again, I'm going to cry.
Yeah.
Where here you work with a really wide variety, and they keep changing
Yeah.
to a certain extent. New winemakers come in, or you run out of wine. How do
We
you?
usually don't run out of wine. That's
Well,
not
yeah,
typically a problem
well,
we have here.
A particular winemaker might run out of wine.
Yeah.
They only made 500 cases
True.
of this
Oh, I
wine.
see what you're
Can I
saying,
can I
yeah.
get that Chard? Sorry.
Yeah, it's all gone.
All gone.
That does happen here.
Yeah, that happens
but
to everyone.
Yeah, the beauty of this company is that we do work with so many different winemakers from around the world. So all of the wines that we offer, they're made exclusively for the Angels, and we never are going to get tired of our inventory because
Right.
it constantly turns over. I think usually about every 6 weeks we have new wines out here, and it's a challenge for our staff to keep up with it and learn the story of the winemaker, learn about the wine, and be able to talk about
That
it.
was what my question was really
Right.
aiming towards. How do you keep current with what you've got, and then how do you figure out when you're dealing with your clients which way they want to go? Like, what is the
Right.
right wine for them?
I think so. The first part of that question, the staff just keeping them up to date. When we have a new wine released, we all try it and we all
good.
talk about what it brings
Nice.
to us, or like if we like it. And then I think the most important thing is that they know about the winemaker. Because like I said, we're showcasing these winemakers.
Right.
And oftentimes those stories are more interesting than
the wine
the
itself,
nose
right.
of the wine.
Right.
So that's definitely key, is knowing the winemakers. And then once you know the winemakers,
You know the
they'll
story.
they'll have similar, they'll have 3 or 4 wines with us perhaps, and so they can try all those wines. And then when it comes to introducing that to the customers, it's really about, do you like it?
Right.
We have a system going here where they can actually explore their own tasting. We don't limit them to 5 wines and pre-selected flights. This is all about coming in, feeling like you're at home and trying the wines and finding the one that suits your palate. Because like we said earlier, everyone's palate's different.
Yeah, the day I was here, and there were just a few people around. It's our slow season, and I was listening to the visitor saying, "Oh well, let's try out like the South African one here. Let's go in that direction."
Yeah.
It was interesting. They said it that way, in that direction. It was very kind of location based, because
Right.
wines
Yeah.
are location based. That's one of the things that you learn in wine making and wine tourism, is how much it's location based.
Right, the geography.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons why this so fascinates me, is that it is such an international collection of wines. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a tour guide, and maybe 30–40% of my clients are international, and I work in a bunch of languages because of that.
Yeah.
Because it's not like if
more
I was a tour guide,
exciting.
if I was a tour guide traveling to other countries bringing Americans with me, I would really only have to speak English.
Right.
Because I'll get someone else to translate. But when my clients come from another country, if they only speak Portuguese,
Yeah.
someone's got to translate, and in the wineries, not so much.
Yeah, we typically
Right.
don't have translators on
Right.
hand.
So that's one of the things I love about this place, is this great collection of international wines, because every time you taste a wine from another country, you are visiting
Right.
that location.
Yeah. That's the beauty of wine. You know, it takes you to a time and a place, and you can reflect on things that happened that year. And definitely here you can jump countries and go traveling on the different wines. So.
And what's wonderful about that is people come to wine country for a couple of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons, after just experiencing wine country, is education. The second biggest reason. By providing all these different wines, you give them a wonderful education, but secondarily, your team gets a tremendous education in wines.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to pay big bucks for this kind of education, and they're paying you.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's nice when people are here because the atmosphere, we're not pretentious, and so we welcome all questions. We welcome beginners. You know, sometimes the ones who know too much about wine, and we're like, it's not a right fit. So definitely having the winemakers come around and talk to us about what went into the winemaking has been my biggest education. And it's helps the staff as well, but there's a lot of information that you have to get across, and it's nice when we can share that information with our guests and they leave here having had a great time and knowing a little more about what goes into wine.
Well, I will tell you one thing, that next year when they have those nominations for like happiest workers in the counties, make sure you nominate this place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I'll nominate myself.
I've noticed it, and I've noticed it at both locations, that
Yeah.
the staff really has a high level of enthusiasm, and the feeling in the place is really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We work hard to maintain a happy employed staff, and I think a lot of it goes to the fact that they're passionate about what they're doing here too.
And the work is interesting.
The work is interesting. It's not boring.
Yeah.
It's always changing. I mean, it gets really lively in here, so
Yes,
it's social,
I've
it's
noticed.
fun. But also, at the end of the day, we're setting up winemakers in business, and that's beautiful.
You're part of a community.
Yeah, we're part of a community.
Well, that's our show for now. We hope you enjoyed it and found it both entertaining and insightful. And until next time, I'm Ralph.
And I'm Lonnie.
And asante.